Hi, I'm Galia. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, walking out in freedom from alcoholism, pill addiction, self-harm, codependency, depression, anxiety, complex PTSD, jealousy, envy, anger, self-deprecation, and many other things. God has been amazing and has walked me through most of these things. I grew up in rural Appalachian, Ohio, to an unwed mother, barely 18, who didn't want to be a mother. She even refused to name me. The hospital wouldn't let either of us leave the hospital until I had a name. So my aunt named me. I left the hospital that day with my grandparents, with whom I lived until I was 3. When I was 3, I went to live with my mother. By this time, she was married, had 2 other children, one whom had died just weeks later from SIDS. Then she had a 4th child a couple years later. I was a parentified child, taking care of my siblings' every need. And I was responsible for making sure the bills were paid. It was during this time, at the age of 3, that my life became a nightmare. I would go to my grandparents on weekends. My grandfather was a member of the KKK. He groomed me the whole time I lived with them so he could sell me to his fellow Klan members. It was also during this time that my mother's husband, his family, and her boyfriends after her divorce started sexually abusing me. Her second husband, however, is the biggest monster in my story. Mother's second husband came into my life when I was 8. My brother and sister adored him. Me, not so much. My mother told him about what other people had done, and then he took that to a whole new level. The torture, the rape, and the trafficking I experienced at the hand of this man was indescribable. I started cutting several times a day when I was 10. I was epileptic and on phenobarbital. When my mother started selling them, I knew there was something special about them. So I started taking many at once. I liked how it made me feel. Then I started mixing it with alcohol. I had access to all the alcohol I wanted because Mother and her husband were heavy drinkers. I had 3 abortions. The first when I was 12 to hide what was going on at home. Soon after, I moved in with my grandmother, and an eating disorder had begun to take control of me. Soon after, Mother and her second husband divorced so she could marry her boyfriend. Grandmother let her second husband move in. My grandmother was a tyrant, so the abuse was perpetuated. By age 15, I was being tortured, bought, and sold on a regular basis. I got pregnant and had a second abortion. I felt ashamed, disgusting, worthless, hopeless, helpless, and alone. I knew life wasn't going to change, so I overdosed on several kinds of pills and was sure this would kill me. It didn't. It put me on life support for 9 days. When I woke up, I was angry at myself because I couldn't get it right. I was angry at God for not letting me die, and I was angry at my situation. I was angry because when I woke up, the only person who was there was a social worker from CPS who told me the whole 9 days I was there, not a single person from my family came to visit, not one. This is when my journey in the foster care system began. I was placed with a wonderful, loving Christian couple. I was their first foster child. They had no idea what they were getting when they got me. They didn't know how to love me or what to do for me. They tried their best. They were kind and welcomed me into their family. They even took me to church and sent me to church camp, where I was saved. When I got home from church camp, I was so on fire for the Lord, and they were ecstatic. I only lived with them for a few months before I ran away. I didn't want them to love me because I didn't believe I was deserving of their love, because I was too broken and too tainted to be loved. I couldn't let them love me because there was a chance they would hurt me too, and I couldn't allow that. It was my job to protect myself because in foster care, The only person you have is yourself. But I did know in my heart that God was with me and He was my protector. My head, however, couldn't believe that. From this foster home, I went to a county-run group home for a couple of months until another placement could be found. I then went to an out-of-county group home where I got kicked out after 6 weeks because of another suicide attempt. From there, I went back to the county-run group home. I felt ashamed and alone, like I didn't fit anywhere, and I was now a burden on the system. Now I was determined to die more than ever. This led to many psych hospital admissions. My social worker was frustrated and at her wit's end. She tried to find another placement quickly because the county-run group home was only set up to be a temporary placement, so she had to find something else. She finally found a residential treatment center for mental health for adolescents a few counties away. She stressed that I had to make it work because she was out of options for me. But I knew this would be one more place that would kick me to the curb like all the others. I was a handful while I was there. They should have kicked me out many times, but they didn't. They said they didn't care what I did. They weren't kicking me out, and they were in it for the long haul. But I didn't believe them, and I tested that often. I was there for 18 months until I aged out of foster care. When I aged out of foster care, I was literally pushed out the door with a garbage bag of my belongings, and the door was locked behind me. I had a huge mental meltdown. I ended up in a state mental hospital for 6 months. I was raped while I was at the hospital and had my 3rd abortion. When I got out of the hospital, I still struggled, so I had nearly round-the-clock case managers unless I was asleep or at work. I got 3 jobs, an apartment, and I met my first fiance. We moved in together. I thought he would be the man that I spent the rest of my life with, until he wasn't. After this, I ended up in the state mental hospital again, where I met a woman who would introduce me to the man who would eventually become my husband. Thought he was safe. After all, he was a police officer, a volunteer fireman, and an EMT. He had to be wonderful, right? We were engaged 5 times before we were married. The last time we got engaged was because I was pregnant with our first child, and I refused to be a single parent. We were together a year and a half on and off when we got married in September of 1996. Our daughter was born in March of 1997. We were happy. I thought our relationship was going to be better than ever. I was so wrong. I was allowed to be a stay-at-home mama, but I still had to earn my keep. This is when I learned what the thin blue line was really about. I had to do extracurricular activities. It started with just people from his department. Then it escalated to 2 departments across the U.S. Being bought and sold became a normal part of life for me. And I felt a lot of shame. This had me in such a dark place. I felt like even God was disgusted with me. But in his word, he reminds me that he sent his son to cleanse me when he says in Isaiah 2:18 and 19, "Come, now let's settle this. Though your sins are like scarlet, I will make them white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, I will make them white as wool. If you obey me, you will have plenty to eat." So I knew that though I felt disgusting about myself, at least God saw something in me, though I wasn't sure what. I did believe he was keeping me safe and had been keeping me safe my entire life. In 2002, our second child was born, a son. I thought things would change now that he had a son, but again, I was wrong. The emotional and verbal abuse and his narcissism only escalated. It escalated to other forms of abuse, and I was fearing for my life. In 2017, I was struggling with addiction to pills and alcohol, which I saw as an escape rather than a problem. Until one night when we were entertaining, My husband would mix drinks, and I had taken a lot of pills. I was so sick, I laid on the bathroom floor for 3 days, and I thought I was going to die. I knew then that something had to change. I prayed for God to do something, anything. I didn't care what it was. I just knew I didn't want to live this way anymore. I was at my bottom, and I wanted to die. So God, being God, put a Christian life coach in my life. I was resistant for a while, but then I began working with her. At first, I wasn't very open because I thought she would think I was too broken to even try to help, but she did. She was in Tennessee. I was in Ohio. So we met via Skype. She was my life coach and trauma coach for over a year before she became more than a coach, but a really good friend. She introduced me to Celebrate Recovery. When I went to my first meeting, I was so terrified. I couldn't get out of my car. I was so scared, I was paralyzed from the waist down. But the woman who eventually became my sponsor saw me and tried to help me out of my car, but I fell straight to the ground because my legs wouldn't work. She prayed over me and helped me up. When we went into the meeting, by the end of praise and worship, my legs felt like jelly, but I could stand. That woman became my sponsor for about 6 months until she moved away, and then my trauma coach became my sponsor. As a leader of Celebrate Recovery in Tennessee, she knew how it worked. Sadly, she was only in my life for a season before she ghosted me. But before that, she helped me in many ways, including walking through the steps and helping me get to safety from the situation that I was in with my now ex-husband. And I have been walking out in freedom from that situation for nearly 4 years. Her leaving me devastated me, but it also helped me grow closer and closer to Jesus. See, before she walked out of my life, she helped me get into a wonderful long-term restoration program for female survivors of sex trafficking called Rest Stop Ministries, or RSM, in May of 2020. When she left, I had people around me, but I still felt alone. I didn't know anyone, really. I was in a state, in a city, where I knew no one. I thought she was all I had, but God. God reminded me that I was never alone. He was always with me. He reminded me of my life verse, Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be fearful, do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I was grateful that the house at RSM had a prayer room. I was in that room sometimes for hours, praying, crying, writing on Post-it notes and putting them on the wall. God has allowed me to heal and learn and grow so much by allowing myself to fully surrender to Him, which I have to do still several times a day, every day. Let me tell you what God has done since then. He gave me the courage and His strength so I could do the hard work of working through my trauma so that I could heal. When I first got to RSM, I was so dissociated. I dissociated nearly 95% of the time, and I could not hold a conversation for even 5 minutes without dissociating. Now, here I am, standing here speaking to you. God has healed that area so much. He has also shown me many character defects and shortcomings that I needed to walk through, and He walked through them with me. He also gave me wonderful people to walk through these things with. In June 2021, God solidified the name that He gave me, Galia, which means redeemed, Ahava, which means deeply loved, Meira, which means shining light, with the clerk and master's office in Wilson County. God has taught me how to see myself the way He sees me, how to love and to receive love. I can stand here today and say, I like who I am becoming. I am not where I want to be, but I am exactly where God wants me to be for such a time as this. I know I am chosen, loved, and seen by Him, and my worth and value is only found in Him. I got a wonderful job in my field of choice at Samaritan Recovery Community in Nashville in March of 2022, where I get to work with some amazing people. I have the most amazing boss, and I get to help others with their journey into recovery. I graduated from RSM in April of 2022. I lived in their transitional apartment until August 2022 when I got my own apartment in Nashville. I got a new car in January 2023. I got to go back to Ohio in June of 2023 and start the reconciliation process with my adult daughter. My son, however, is still a work in progress. God is still working on him, but I know he will come around in God's timing. In the last 6 months, I've gotten 2 promotions at my job, and my best friend moved in with me. I have been given many opportunities to walk in my purpose by speaking and writing. God has been walking me through some grief, resentment, fear, and anger lately. I have an amazing sponsor who helps me stay on track, loves me with truth when needed, and always points me back to God when I'm struggling. I have been a member of Celebrate Recovery for 8 years, and I have been a member of this Celebrate Recovery for nearly 4. And I have been so clean and sober for nearly 7 years. I had a relapse my first year in recovery. I believe the 10th step is the most important. We continue to take a personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Taking a personal daily inventory is important because we can sometimes hurt people in a moment of personal stress, not even meaning to. And unless we check ourselves, we cannot make prompt amends. Notice the step says when we were wrong, not if we were wrong. We're going to be wrong because we are human. None of us are perfect, but God gives us His sufficient grace, and His mercies are new every morning. To the newcomer, I would say, keep going, don't give up. When things get hard and life comes on life's terms, because life will, that's when we need to press into God, your sponsor, your support teams, and your accountability partners even more. Also, get into a step study. In conclusion, I would like to say, this truly is a program to be worked together, not alone. We cannot do it without God and each other. So let's lock arms, take a warrior stance, straighten our crowns, and keep fighting the good fight together. With God, we will get through everything life throws at us. It works if you work it, so work it because you're worth it. I am Galia. Thanks for letting me share.